All right. Let's just make sure we have the correct stream chosen. I think we do. Let's make sure it works on my little playlist here. Let's take a look. I think it does. Let's see if we sound right. I think we do. Okay. I think other than sharing it on Twitter, that's all that's left, and then we'll get going. All right. So let's just share this real quick, and then we'll get started. Okay. All right. Well, I think that is everything. Just going to double check the sound one more time to make sure everything is okie dokie, and then we will continue on with the circus, as it were. Right? Yeah? Circus? Sounds like a circus. Okay. Okie dokie. So, I think that's it. We're all good to go. We're up and running. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are. My name is Patrick Lockwood, Dr. Patrick Lockwood. But for the purposes of this podcast, I'm just Patrick, so please don't sue me, etc., etc. Anyways, this is UnShrink Me, which is a weekly podcast dedicated to mostly the consumers of mental health services. If you are brand new to the UnShrink Me universe, I want you to understand that this is a weekly podcast dedicated to all topics related to mental health and anything that will hopefully help make it easier for you, if you're a consumer of counseling, coaching, or therapy, to get what you need from your professional. So the whole purpose of this podcast, really genuinely, is just to talk about trending or popular ideas in clinical psychology, psychiatry, mental health more broadly, so that we can get the most out of the services that we are seeking. And, occasionally I like to talk about the clinical side of things and what the professionals are doing. And so this podcast is supposed to be openly critical of the profession, of the various subspecialties and pieces of the profession. Nobody is safe, including myself, and that is actually the focus of today's podcast, which we'll get a little bit more into. So again, UnShrink Me is a weekly podcast on Saturdays focused on helping the consumers of mental health services get the most out of their services. This is not, however, professional advice for you as a consumer of mental health services. So this is me speaking very broadly for the sake of trying to share what I believe makes sense. It is up to you as an individual to make informed decisions with your mental health provider if you have one. So I am not giving you as an individual specific advice, just so we're all clear. So please don't sue me, etc., etc. Okay? So today is going to be a very different podcast compared to my normal pick on people and tweets thing that I do, mostly critical for good reasons. Today I'm actually going to speak at length about myself. And the reason that I'm going to do this is because, as I will explain in just a little bit, I think something that I've said on Twitter specifically is not being understood correctly by the people who have a problem with what I'm saying. So in the service of trying to be clear and specific, which is my goal most of the time, I'm going to use myself as an example of what I was talking about on Twitter so that everyone can understand what I'm trying to do as opposed to what I'm not trying to do. So that's just a little teaser of what's happening today. As always, this podcast is not NOT, sponsored by Celsius. But boy, is that good. So yeah, let's dig in. I'm going to warm us up with a bit of a softball post. And then after the softball post, we'll get into the topic du jour, which is, interestingly enough, today, me, not other people. So I'm going to start with my buddy Nick Tabor, because Nick is someone that I discuss often on this podcast. And so let me start with his post because I think it's a nice warm up for what I'm about to say about myself. And for those of you who are brand new, feel free to follow along on Twitter because I try to tweet out live the things that I'm discussing in real time so you can see and kind of timestamp and fact check me, etc. Okay. So, Mick Tabor, who I've spoken about many times in this podcast before, his handle is at NICKTABER, and my handle, if you're new, is at ALOBHAPATRICK, at Alobha Patrick. Here's what Nick said a few days ago. He said addiction treatment is a disturbing farce much of the time, in parentheses, apart from the technical support needed to come off drugs. They often coercively invade your inner life, which causes immense psychological wounding, which increases the need for drugs. Then, when people leave with worse problems, the clinicians running these places are like, well, they were such a basket case, we did our best. So Nick is talking about the fact that oftentimes addiction treatment will make people more sick because people do invasive things in rehab, like pushing and poking and prodding on childhood traumas and shame and guilt and all these things when maybe people are not ready. So he said, addiction treatment is a disturbing farce. And for those of you who don't know, I've spent most of my career working in what I lovingly call Rehabistan, drug rehabs. So I know what he's talking about. There are a great many programs that exist currently that basically provoke people into relapsing. Now, sometimes it's intentional because they're doing shady, illegal, terrible things like body brokering, and sometimes it's unintentional, but it does happen, and it's terrible when it happens. So I just want everyone to understand that, Nick is not exaggerating about how farcical the rehab system is. The idea that they, as Nick said, coercively, invade your inner life, that does happen too, because a lot of people that work in rehabs are counselors or people sometimes early in recovery themselves who don't know how to have boundaries appropriately. There's a lot of very unwell people specifically in Rehabistan who haven't really gotten much recovery under their belt. They don't really know much about their childhood stuff or their shame or their guilt or their trauma or whatever it is. And so they poke and prod in people when they're not even very healed themselves, as it were. And so Nick is correct about this. And he says, then when people leave with worse problems, the clinicians running these programs are like, well, they were so sick we couldn't do any better, which is true. A lot of people in the profession do not take responsibility for the ways in which they hurt people while they're in rehabs. And so it's our job as professionals to be very clear about what types of interventions we use, why we're using them, and the consequences to patients, because often there are many consequences to patients. So please be very clear that I agree with Nick in many ways, but there are good rehabs. As I always say, there are some good rehabs. I have made a career as a consultant helping people fix their rehabs and make them better and make their teams better and train in skills and ethics and supervision. So there are ways to make things better. It's not a total loss. I don't want people to give up hope on getting sober if you need professional help. So if you need help with your drug problem, there are good programs out there in your state, in your community. There are good counselors. They're just good, ordinary people who do the work. So please don't give up hope, even though there are many problems in the system. We should never give up hope, in my opinion. So just a little grist for the mill. Thank you, dear Nick, for always contributing to the podcast in so many ways. So without further delay, I think it is time to really get the show on the ROAD and talk about something that happened the last couple of weeks, honestly, that I think has been challenging for many people that chat with me online. So here's the backstory for those of you who don't know. For those of you who are not on Twitter, which is probably good. It's probably a sign of sanity that you don't spend much time online, if at all. But there are many of us on therapist Twitter, which is a very interesting corner of Twitter, that talk about the various types of problems that clinicians have and ethics and the type of treatment that is worth doing and not doing and all these things. And so I want everyone to be clear that what I'm about to say, this entire podcast about myself, is only specifically about myself, and I can never fully know with any certainty. I can never fully know what exactly is happening in the minds of other people. I don't ever talk online from the perspective of I perfectly understand what is happening with other people, just so everyone's clear. And if it ever seems like that, feel free to push on me, but I'll tell you very straightforwardly that I am not so brilliant or insightful or a mind reader such that I can perfectly know what's happening with other people. However, I think what happened on Twitter was people were assuming that I could perfectly know some things. What up, Phil? Glad you're here. Glad you're here, Phil. But I am not assuming that I know things perfectly about other people, just so we're clear. So what I'm about to do right now, what I'm finna do, as the kids say, is discuss a couple of posts all at once. I'm not going to discuss them separately, but I'm going to retweet one that got a lot of pushback about 5 days ago. So give me just a second. So about 5 days ago, let me read just, Jeff says, theory of mind, no one's 100%. Exactly. No one is 100%. It's impossible to be 100%. Thank you for showing up, Jeff. So 5 days ago, here's what I said. It got thousands and thousands of views and hundreds of likes and lots of interaction, all this stuff. So let me just read verbatim what I said. Let me try to explain what I was doing without trying to back off or make myself look good. And then let me explain myself and how I fit in what I said. Okay, so here's what I said 5 days ago that got all sorts of hell from all sorts of people. Here's what I said, and I quote, "People who enjoy doing psychotherapy are often voyeurs and narcissists who do not acknowledge, in parentheses, or see the depths of, their personal emotional / countertransference issues." Right underneath that, I also said, others who enjoy therapy are sadists or masochists whose personal, in parentheses, countertransferential gains from doing therapy come from witnessing the suffering of others, even co-signing their suffering or encouraging it. Okay, so obviously that particular two-part tweet is very scandalous, to say the least. It's very scandalous. And so, just again, I basically said there's one type of clinician who specifically enjoys, Ryan says such a good tweet, he's losing his mind. Thank you, Ryan. There's a type of clinician who enjoys doing therapy because they're voyeurs and narcissists who do not acknowledge or see the depths of their personal, emotional, or countertransference issues. And then there are others who enjoy therapy because they're sadists or masochists whose personal issues, their stuff, keeps them from understanding it, so they keep helping people suffer because they enjoy watching people suffer. Or because, anyways, so let me just break this down as simply as I humanly can, and then I'll explain myself. That's what I promised I would do. So here's what I said. I said there's a class of people I don't know. Yeah, Phil says, you've never seen something so small as someone wrapped up in their self. Exactly, and I'm trying not to be, but for the purpose of this podcast, I want to just explain how I think I fit into this. So, important first piece of this first tweet, which is people who enjoy doing psychotherapy. So there are people who really get a lot emotionally out of doing the work we call psychotherapy. And so that's an important piece of this, because there are some people who do not enjoy this as much. It's not the most enjoyable thing they do, for instance. But for the people that really, really, really like therapy, right, that's what I'm talking about, are often voyeurs and narcissists. So, what's a voyeur? A voyeur is a person who gets some kind of emotional satisfaction. In a sexual context, obviously, that's like sexual arousal, but voyeur is not generally about sex, by the way. The general concept of voyeur is getting some kind of emotional thrill out of watching someone engage in something emotionally stimulating. It could be sex, it could be watching a movie, it could be watching a play, whatever it is. So, like, I'm talking about the idea that some therapists are very voyeuristic. They get a lot of emotional thrill out of watching people in front of them, their patients, have emotional experiences, like watching a show or a play, for instance. And I also said they're narcissists, right? So, narcissists, if we're talking about the general personality organization, not the disorder, if you're organized narcissistically, which is different than being disordered, just so we're all clear. If you are narcissistically organized, what that means is that you think of yourself as uniquely special. And if you're more grandiose in your presentation, you believe that you deserve special experiences more than ordinary experiences. And so you're hyper-focused on yourself. And if you're more grandiose in your narcissism, your specialness has to be affiliated with other special people, right? And so what I'm saying is there's a type of therapist out there who gets off on emotionally, who enjoys the experience of watching people grow and have feelings like they're watching a play or a movie, right? And it's very self-focused. Their enjoyment of therapy, what they get out of it, is more about themselves and their feelings than about the patient actually getting better. That is secondary, is what I'm saying in that first tweet. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. So just to recap, that very first tweet, what I'm saying is there's a type of person who really enjoys therapy, right? And I think that the average person who enjoys doing therapy is built more voyeuristically and narcissistically. That's what I'm saying. That doesn't mean they have a disorder. I'm just saying I think this is more their personality organization. And the reason they enjoy therapy so much compared to other things, maybe, as a career and as a lifestyle, is because it serves their need to be special, to get special attention from a patient, and to watch something play out voyeuristically, to enjoy, get a thrill out of people's growth and change and progress and struggles, right? Like watching a good play or a movie or whatever. So that's what I'm saying with tweet number 1. Tweet number 2, I think there's another group of people who really enjoy doing therapy. I'm adding the word really right now, but I mean this generally. There's another group of people who enjoys therapy who are more sadistic, which means they take pleasure in the suffering of other people. Or they're masochists, which means they take pleasure in their own suffering. And that's the kind of therapist who sits there and lets people trauma dump on them all day, for instance, with bad boundaries. Or you're a sadistic type, which means that you have either minimal problem with other people suffering or you really enjoy the suffering of other people, right? And so I'm saying with these 2 tweets that there are 3 or 4 different types of people who enjoy therapy. I did not say these were all therapists because some therapists don't actually enjoy the work, right? Which includes myself, by the way. Other people kind of enjoy the work, but they enjoy other things more, for instance. And so I'm talking about the spectrum of enjoyment, how much you actually enjoy the work. And my belief is that the more that you enjoy the work, the more you are organized in one of these 4 ways, if not a combination of these things, because you could have all of these tweets, or all of these traits, I was thinking about my tweets. You can have all of these traits, and that's not weird, by the way, because every profession, by the way, pulls for certain traits, right? Like I'd be willing to bet just completely tangentially that firefighters pull for people that are more masochistic. They get off on, being in pain and risking their lives, or people who are adrenaline deficient, right? Or people who are narcissistic, who are full of themselves because they think that they can go rescue people and they're good for rescuing people and they want praise for rescuing people, right? I'm sure the same is true for ER doctors or ER nurses. I'm sure there's some masochism in being a nurse, right? And so I'm not saying that therapists are especially screwed up or something like that. I'm saying that different types of work pull for different types of traits. And I think that's fairly uncontroversial. I just think that a lot of people, especially who responded to these tweets, are less comfortable with acknowledging how they are built because they don't want to look bad. And fair enough, if you're more narcissistically organized, you do not want to look bad. You want to look good and you want to look special in your goodness. And so I am not saying that therapists who enjoy therapy are complete narcissistic personality disorder types. I am not saying that they're sadists like, serial killers. I'm not saying they're masochists like people who go to BDSM parties. I'm not saying anything superlative like that, just so we're all clear. I am saying literally that people who enjoy these activities of doing therapy are more likely to be more narcissistic, more voyeuristic, more sadistic, and more masochistic. I just think it's completely unsurprising that professions that involve these kinds of activities wouldn't pull for certain personality traits. So that's what I was trying to do, but a lot of people lost their minds as if I was saying you're a bad, evil, broken, stupid person if you like therapy, if you get something out of doing therapy. So that's just putting that out there for whatever it is. But here's the other thing. It's interesting when you enjoy your work a lot. There's something interesting and different about the kind of person who enjoys their work a lot. Usually that's not a normal person. So if you all know what the normal curve is, that Gaussian distribution, the normal distribution, that first standard deviation where something like 64% of the population lives, that's the average person, high or low on a particular trait. What I'm talking about, most professionals in psychotherapy and mental health in therapy land, the world's worst theme park, probably live between the first and second standard deviation on any of these traits I mentioned: voyeurism, narcissism, sadism, and masochism. I'm not saying they're at the second or third standard deviation. I just think they live probably between the first and second standard deviation. So to me, it's just like being a biologist and saying, wow, isn't it cool that these birds develop these particular kinds of beaks to survive in this ecosystem? That's the same thing that I was trying to do, but people lost their shit over it. And so, in the spirit of good faith and trying to be super honest about this, I'm going to try and explain who I think I am, not because I want to demystify my specialness or some shit like that, not so I can look good, but I'm sure I'll get accused of that as well. But I want people to understand how I understand myself because I am the tool of my trade. So there's a couple of chats here before I get into explaining myself. Let me read the things in the chat. Jeff says the ego we were talking about the other day, it can really overshadow itself. Absolutely. Our ego can destroy us or keep us in denial. Ryan says this describes you for sure. Phil says I'm a celibate. That's funny. I don't know why that's there, but thank you. Yes, Megan, it is scary. It's absolutely scary how therapists can be this different. And if they're not aware of it, maybe they can hurt people. And just to say something about what Megan said, that's scary. It is 100% the truth that if you are a therapist who is extra narcissistic between the first and second standard deviation, or voyeuristic, or sadistic, or masochistic, you are more at risk of harming people compared to if you're more of a normie in some way, shape, or form. So it is scary. However, good supervision and consultation can help you rein in these traits, work with them better, and so on and so forth. Jonathan said, what if I'm voyeuristic about watching myself take abuse from others, but only in a mirror? That sounds like masochism. It sounds like kind of the BDSM thing, John. Jeff says, plus it was only an opinion. You're allowed to have opinions. Yes, Jeff, I am allowed to have opinions. And they're also allowed to have their opinions, however upset they are about it. In the back in the day, there were two options for people with brain disorders: beer or the Bible. I mean, beer is a good choice often, but I come from the rehab world, so that makes sense. So let me explain how I think. Just being super clear, this is what I believe is true. I do not know this with some perfect certainty because I know people will accuse me, or might accuse me at least, of being overly confident or in denial or projecting or something like that. So I'm sure people can say that I'm overcompensating or whatever it is, and that's all fine. Feel free to say whatever you want to say about me. I'm open to it, and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. That's great. Whatever is true is whatever is true. I just want to explain so that I can walk people through my tweets what I think is true about myself and how I think that affects my ability to do the job that I do. If I can understand the tool that I am, no kidding around, no jokes about being a tool, like I know I'm a dick, but my job here today with this stream is to be really clear about what I believe is happening. Jonathan's like, I was trying to be masochistic and a little narcissistic, but with poor awareness. You're very funny, Jonathan. So like, I want everyone to be super clear that my goal is not to be perfect or to look good or to look especially bad. I'm not trying to like please a particular segment of the people that responded to the post. This is me trying to be as, relatively speaking, objective as I can, incorporating data that I think I know about myself from my self-observations and my own therapy and things like that, but also from the feedback from people outside of me that I've worked with professionally, my supervisors in the past, my mentors, and I'll even talk about my dad a little bit, who's also a shrink who has helped me. So not formally professionally helped me, but like been a mentor. So I'm going to try and explain what I think is true about me when it comes to my personality traits and how I am organized as a person and how I think this affects the way I do my job. And I'm doing this for two reasons. One, I want people who think I'm out of control with these two tweets I made to shut the fuck up and understand that their insane, intense reactions are just about their insecurities. Like, you could just own who you are and your life will get better. You don't have to be that in denial or afraid of looking bad. Looking bad is such bullshit in this case. And I'll explain why I think that as it relates to my personality style. You're just a person, and it's okay to be different or screwed up in whatever way that you are. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this. I'm doing this to normalize talking about how screwed up we are in a normative sense, statistically speaking, but also in a practical, how does it apply to, doing the work better? But the other reason I'm doing this is because people have all sorts of fantasies about me. I'd love for you to have some more specifics that you can fantasize about, maybe be more accurate in your fantasizing about me. So those are the two reasons I'm doing this. Admittedly narcissistic. So let's start there. I believe, just to outline this for everyone, it is my belief, which again, just a caveat, I could be wrong about this. I could be overcompensating. I could be undercompensating, blah, blah, blah. Pretend I have said all the relevant caveats so I don't look like a dick or I don't look like an asshole or whatever fantastical problem. Just pretend. So I believe, from the point of view of the 5-factor model of personality, the big five: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, that I would score, around the 80th percentile or higher for trait openness. I'm very curious as a person. Excuse me. I'm very flexible in many situations. I like new things. I like learning. There's various things about me that I'm very open to. I think I have relatively high fluid intelligence. I don't think I'm some super genius. I just think that I can move pretty flexibly through topics and ideas and respond pretty openly and clearly. I also think I would score probably somewhere above the 80th or 90th percentile of trait conscientiousness. I think that I like doing things correctly. I like being clear and precise and following the instructions that make the most sense to get the job done the best way as a person. This has been true about me ever since I was a little kid. I would say that to the best of my recollection and knowledge, I probably score somewhere around the 30th or 40th percentile of trait extroversion. I am not a chatty Cathy at parties. I don't really like socializing. I don't get off on connecting with people and all that stuff. And so I'm really kind of not very extroverted. I can certainly turn on some of the charm. I have some positive regard for other people, but I'm not really like super enthused about talking to other people, especially, you know, in a fluid social situations. Now, I'm a professor, which means I certainly love talking to students and having collaborative discussions, but I'm also more in control in that environment compared to like a party or something. So that's different, right? That's extroversion. Agreeableness. I'm probably below the 10th percentile of agreeableness. I give zero fucks about what you think about me most of the time. I am not particularly empathic. I don't really feel very strongly when you're going through something as a person. So I'm not really empathically engaged when it comes to other people on the planet. I don't really feel very moved by the feelings of other people, which is, by the way, one of the reasons I don't really enjoy doing therapy. And I'll talk about sadism and masochism and all those things in a little bit, but I just want to start with the big five because that's the model that's popular for a lot of people. So I'm not very agreeable. I don't care about conflict. Conflict is even a lot of fun for me because it usually means something good is happening. In my mind, other people think something is that's catastrophic is happening when conflict is happening. I like it. It's fun. It's fun to spar. I grew up sparring. It's part of my life, right? And it's a good thing in my experience most of the time. And it doesn't matter if there's a rupture because I think it'll be repaired or it won't, and who cares, right? Because that's the low empathy piece of agreeableness. And then neuroticism. I can't say for sure. I would say probably below the 30th percentile. So I don't have a lot of negative emotion on a regular basis. I have some. I'm anxious from time to time, sometimes mostly situationally, I think. But I'm not like worked up, internally worrying or obsessing most of the day. I'm not scanning for my negative emotions or whatever it is on a regular basis. I'm not easily overwhelmed in most situations, 9 out of 10 situations. So I think I'm, above the 80th for openness and conscientiousness, below the 40th for extroversion, below the 10th percentile for agreeableness, and probably below the 30th or so for neuroticism. I think that's true about me. Now, the problem is, this is my biased opinion of myself. I teach about the Big Five personality model, so I could be overcompensating or undercompensating and all this shit to look good or look bad or whatever. So again, there's the caveat one more time, So this is what I believe is true about me from the Big Five personality model. So what does that mean about me? It doesn't mean anything just yet. Let me add other traits to this list. So far I've just talked about the Big Five personality traits. Now, let me talk about other traits that I discussed in this thread. So let me talk about voyeurism. Let me talk about narcissism. Let me talk about exhibitionism. Let me talk about grandiosity. Let me talk about sadism and masochism. I'm going to talk about those 5 things, I think. So there are self-report scales for a couple of these things, like the dark triad, dark tetrad scales. And I would be willing to bet, probably to many people's not surprise on Twitter, that I would score fairly high on trait narcissism. And I'm more of the grandiose type than I am the, vulnerable type, in my opinion at least, because I have no problem boasting. I have no problem getting attention. So I score very high on trait exhibitionism. I do like attention. I do enjoy getting attention from people, even though I'm not very extroverted, but I enjoy it in a one-directional way. So true extroverts can be grandiose narcissists, like especially 90th percentile types. But as a more exhibitionistic type of narcissist who's more introverted, in my opinion of myself, I enjoy one-directional attention more than I enjoy bi-directional attention. So I'll certainly have conversations with people if it serves the specific purpose of giving me attention and making me look special, and feel important. So I hope everyone heard me say that, because I'm trying to tell the truth about what I believe is happening. So Phil is asking, what do you mean by exhibitionism? So in the personality theory version of exhibitionism, I don't mean in the sexual sense of exhibitionism. I mean in the personality theory version of it. Exhibitionism is the tendency to enjoy being perceived or watched or liked, right? So there's the pathological kind of pervert version of exhibitionism where it's like you're the guy who goes and flashes people in public and make them look at your junk so you get some thrill out of it, right? That's the fetish version, the kink version, the pathological version or whatever in the DSM. But when you're talking about personality theory and the development of the self-concept, especially development of narcissism, one of the traits that develops in early childhood that I think I am different on is I think I would score fairly high on trait exhibitionism. I'm very aware of when people are paying attention to me, not neurotically, just in the sense that I hope that they're liking what they're seeing. And so what I enjoy is getting attention in a one-directional way, where it's mostly about me. And that's why I like being a professor, for instance. That's why I like doing a YouTube channel, because although this is bidirectional and I am chatting with you all in the chat, I really like it when all the attention is on me compared to if it's more of a conversation. Whereas other people who are somewhat less exhibitionistic might have podcasts where they have more guests on, if that makes sense. So I believe that I'm a little more grandiose than average, probably above the 60th percentile or 70th. I don't know. So I'm a little more grandiose. I think I'm great in many ways. I think I'm special. I think I should get special attention. And so I've created a life where I get special attention, where I have a weekly YouTube, I've got the Twitter, I've got the professor thing. So I've created a life where people have to pay attention to me, or at least if they're willing to play along, pay attention to me and give me more so one-directional attention. I'm aware of this. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Just like I said in this post, I think that depending upon how you're built, you will enjoy certain things more or less. And so that is why, by the way, I don't enjoy therapy very much. This is actually one specific important reason why I don't enjoy therapy very much. Because if I am more grandiose and more exhibitionistic, then my problem is I'm looking for patients to think I'm special and listen to me. But in good therapy, it really is about the therapist listening to the patient, right? So I'm going to say that again. In good therapy, it's more about how the patient listens and the equal dialogue between two people. Whereas because I am a little more grandiose than the average person and exhibitionistic than the average person and narcissistic than the average person, I actually get more good feelings, positive feedback, whatever, when it's more one-directional, where I'm receiving more of the attention in these limited contexts, right? That's one reason why I don't like therapy. The other reason I don't like therapy is because of what I said earlier about trait agreeableness. I'm not very empathic, which means I'm not very internally moved emotionally by the internal states and the suffering and feelings of other people. I'm also, believe it or not, particularly sadistic. I'm not very sadistic. I don't really get off on other people's suffering. I don't like watch a movie and go, that piece of crap, he got what he deserved in the movie. That sometimes happens when I watch a movie, but that's not very common for me. So I'm like probably 50th percentile around trait sadism. I'm not like super sadistic or not super sadistic. So there's a lot of comments in the chat, but I want to keep explaining who I think I am first before I get to these comments. Okay, guys? So I've talked about trait, narcissism. I've talked about grandiosity. I've talked about exhibitionism. I've tried to be clear about the ways in which I get those needs met. So I'm not out there flashing people at the gym or at the park or something. Thank God I didn't turn out like that. I just try to get my attention needs met on YouTube and Twitter as a professor and all this stuff. And I think that that's the most adaptive way of getting those needs met that's the least harmful to other people. Because obviously there are much more harmful versions like the sadistic kink, version of that where you're trying to hurt other people by flashing yourself and all this stuff, right? So I've talked about grandiosity, narcissism, exhibitionism. I just want to say a little bit more about sadism, and then voyeurism and masochism. So let's start with voyeurism. So I don't know if this is true. This is my best guess about myself. I would say I'm probably fairly middle of the road on voyeurism. I think there's a piece of me that enjoys watching the vicissitudes of people or whatever. I think there's a piece of me that will watch intently the outside world, but I don't think that's really about the emotional experience of it. I think it's actually more about the experience of gathering data to either serve one of these other personality traits or to solve a particular logistical problem, kind of like a Terminator would, as it were. Not that I'm a Terminator, I'm not special or a robot or whatever, right? But it's more problem focused than it is like, oh, I enjoy watching people at the gym or at the park or whatever it is. So I'm not particularly voyeuristic. I'm probably 40th or 30th percentile. Hey, Angie, good to see you here. I'm deep in the middle of trying to explain what I think my personality is, because I got all sorts of help trying to critique clinical personalities and how they affect therapy. So I'm trying to lead by example and share what I think is true about me so other people can understand how they're built and maybe feel more free to be honest about how they're built. Because I think when we're honest about how we're built, it makes it easier to do the work that we do. And when we are more in denial about it or we rationalize how we're built, I think we're more defended, we're less free, and we have less fun. We probably hurt ourselves and other people more. So I want people to have my example so they can maybe feel more free to talk about who they think they are and openly think about and talk about it and maybe explore who they are as professionals. And I want patients to understand how I see myself too, because I think the truth is I understand it, and I'm open to all feedback about the ways that I'm wrong, you know? So I don't think I'm particularly voyeuristic. I'm sure I have modes and moments where I enjoy it, but I'm not like, there's a great movie that I love very much called Little Nicky, which is an Adam Sandler movie. And it begins with John Lovitz sitting in a tree, as a voyeur watching some lady undress, right? And he falls and he dies and he goes to hell and he gets tortured and stuff. And it's like, I'm not that guy. I don't sit in the tree and watch people undress. I'm not really interested in watching the lives of other people. I'm a little too self-involved to actually care about the lives of other people. Hey, Darren. Glad you're here. A lot of people are here. By the way, thank you all for being here. This really means a lot to me because, as I have said so far, I believe that I'm fairly narcissistic, a little grandiose, a little extra grandiose, and not very empathic. So I'm very one-directional. I like people watching. So thank you all for being here. I'm trying to explain, Darren, just so you know, I'm trying to explain who I think I am so that other people have permission to understand who they are and not feel bad. I want to give people permission to not feel bad about who they are if they are something, right? If you're different in some way, I want you to feel free to own it and understand it. So that is why I'm trying to walk through all this publicly, which might get me in trouble. It might get me fired. Who fucking cares? So far, what I've walked through is I've walked through the big five personality for myself. I've walked through grandiosity, exhibitionism, voyeurism, general narcissism. And let's talk about sadism and masochism, because I talked about those two traits as well in the tweets that got me all sorts of attention and pushback. So with regard to sadism, I do not believe that I am particularly sadistic. I am not the kind of person that generally enjoys the suffering of other people. Like I was saying earlier, I don't watch movies, for instance, and every time the bad guy gets killed or defeated, I'm not like, yeah, I don't really care, right? Because as I said earlier, I'm a little more grandiose and narcissistic, and I'm very low on agreeableness. I don't particularly have an empathic, relationship with other people. People are more like things to me than they are like people, by the way. So, and that's important for people to understand. That has positive consequences and negative consequences, but I haven't gotten there yet, so I'll get there. So anyways, I'm not particularly sadistic, probably around the 30th or 40th percentile, maybe 50th. Maybe I'm just like average. Maybe I have an average amount of sadistic wishes. But I don't, for instance, sit in therapy when I used to do therapy all the time. I don't feel good about the suffering of other people. I don't enjoy the suffering of other people as a professional or as a regular person. So I would say that to the extent that I do take some positive delight in the suffering of other people, it sometimes happens with my so-called enemies because I'm not perfect or whatever. But generally, it's not the thing that gets me off the most. Attention gets me off more. Being right gets me off more. Suffering is not particularly in my thing. It's not like something I can do it. I can make people suffer if I want to, but it doesn't make me go, I feel powerful and in control. Whereas other people who are very sadistic, probably 60th, 70th, 80th percentile, really get a lot of emotional feedback from making people suffer. Whereas I think I'm more on the average or low average side of things. Not that I'm harmless, because I'm certainly not harmless, just so we're clear. On the masochistic side of things, I'd say I'm at least moderately masochistic. And I believe that's because, well, I can't say definitively why. I just think that if you look at my life and the things that I've done in my life, I have done a lot of masochistic things, including, being a clinician, which is wildly masochistic, generally speaking, and putting yourself in a position to suffer, including many times in my life not speaking up for what I deserve and need, and all these things. So I can point to dozens of examples across my life where trait masochism certainly would have shown up across different interpersonal scenarios, right? I'm willing to tolerate suffering because it does something for me, right? And so I think as I have grown, especially after I had a few years of therapy, I have tried to be aware of that and not engage that trait of mine because I don't think it's that adaptive, generally speaking. I think it's more about how I grew up than it is about who I am, per se. So I think I'm not particularly masochistic, maybe 20th or 30th percentile of trait masochism. It certainly has little pockets and spaces where it's useful, but I don't, because I don't mind being the bad guy because I'm fairly disagreeable and things like that. I don't think the masochism is a big deal. I think it's more the agreeableness, the low agreeableness that pops for that in my mind. So far, just to reiterate, just to kind of recap everything that's happened, I have talked about my big five personality style above the 80th percentile on trait openness and conscientiousness, 40th or 30th percentile of extroversion, below the 10th percentile of agreeableness, below the 20th or 30th percentile of neuroticism, something like that. Very narcissistic, moderately high grandiosity, moderately high exhibitionism, and fairly low voyeurism, fairly low masochism, moderate, middle of the road sadism, I think. And I'm talking about all these traits just to be clear, in case anyone clips this and tries to get me fired or whatever. I'm talking about all these traits from the perspective of personality theory, not from the perspective of sexual kinks, not from the perspective of I hate people and here's all the ways that I'm evil. I'm trying to be honest about what I believe is true about who I am. I don't believe that these traits are ideal. I don't believe that these traits are good. I don't believe that these traits are bad. I believe that this is how I'm built. And because this is generally how I'm built, that generally I show up in reliable ways in certain circumstances. So for instance, I don't really enjoy therapy because therapy is a two-directional, if you're being ethical, experience, and it's mostly emphasizing the patient's internal world and their needs and not the clinicians. So I don't enjoy therapy because it's not enough about me, number one. Number two, not getting enough attention, not feeling special and important. And because I'm aware of that, I'm extra cautious when I do therapy with people because it's really, really important to not project or dismiss people or devalue people, because people who are narcissistically organized are prone to doing those things as defenses or when they feel unimportant. So I'm less involved in doing therapy because I'm aware of the ways in which I could do it wrong or hurt people, right? Just to be very clear, I try to have ethics. I try to use my information about the tool, technically speaking, that I am, to live a professional life that's useful and not going to put patients at undue risk, right? So these traits make me very useful in certain situations. Like, for instance, I'm a great clinical supervisor, in my opinion, because in my opinion, I'm really good at seeing things and using my capacity to see things and be a little more objective, like a kind of like a neurosurgeon does when they're kind of sociopathically cutting into a brain, right? And I use that metaphor for a reason, so feel free to come at me about it, but that's what I get to do as a supervisor. That doesn't mean there's no me, by the way, in the supervision. It just means that I can take myself out of it more readily because I'm not emotionally invested as much as the people who are more empathic, right? So I'm not as emotionally invested, which means I can be somewhat more objective. That doesn't mean that I am perfectly objective. At no point am I saying that I am perfectly objective, just so everyone is clear. I'm not even saying I am amazingly objective, at the 90th percentile of objectivity or something ridiculous like that. I'm just saying that I think I might have a setup that makes it easier to not get wrapped up in the neuroses of things between being a supervisor and a relationship and all these things in many ways. I'm also, I think, a very good professor for these reasons as well, because I thrive off of the feedback of people who want me to be special and on a pedestal. That doesn't mean I'm a great professor or a perfect professor or the best professor. I just think I'm above average because I have a sense of humor. I like getting feedback for being funny and smart and special. And because I'm aware of this, I try to do it in a more pro-social way as opposed to a more egotistical, you are beneath me way. There was certainly a time in my life where I was very defensive and not very adaptive in the way that I showed up in the world. However, with some good self-awareness and good colleagues and friends and feedback, I've tried to grow a little bit and not be a dick and full of myself and just use my traits to the best of my ability to be of service to people. The other thing that I think people should know about me, again, not that this makes me good, bad, or anything else like this, is I grew up in Scouts. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. I just did that from memory. And I'm an Eagle Scout. And so I grew up in this culture, this Southern Baptist Scout mixture culture that says, do the right thing and be of service to people. So the problem is I'm built in these ways, which is both good and bad in certain circumstances. But I also had this be of service mentality that I grew up with. And so the unfortunate thing is when all of that is burned into your brain, you can't get away with being too grandiose for too long. Because then all the guilt from like, oh shit, you weren't being of service, you weren't being cheerful and thrifty and brave and clean and all this stuff. Jonathan's like, woo, Scout Law. So like, I'm well aware that I have this like good luck. Thank God there's this good luck that I grew up like this in Scouts and stuff that is the counterbalance to my personality differences. Because without that, I probably would have been like a pick your bad example of narcissism. I probably would have been worse than them without that. I also grew up with a parent in recovery. And so I learned recovery ideas and principles as a kid. I also grew up with a shrink and multiple people in the business. So I grew up reading about all these psychological concepts. So I grew up with all these counterbalances to these personality differences that help even me out and keep me accountable. I also have the really good luck, and it literally is good luck, of just running into good people who keep me accountable. I have colleagues, I have friends from grad school, I have family who keep me accountable. So because of all these checks and balances, I have the good luck of not having to be paranoid. I'm not particularly paranoid or schizoid or whatever. I have the good luck of just having all these natural counterbalances in life where people keep me accountable so I don't get out of control. That doesn't mean I never get out of control. That means that I mostly don't get out of control. I'm trying to be very mindful about not speaking in amazing and black and white ways. I'm trying to be reasonable because I think that is the right thing to do, back to being an Eagle Scout. So this is how I understand myself. And I want to do this for people who are in the profession and also for patients. Because, dear patients and family members of patients, your clinician is a regular person. However, there's a really good chance your clinician is also not a regular person with regard to a couple of personality traits. Maybe it's because of their trauma. Maybe it's because of their shame or their attachment insecurity or whatever it is. Some people think I'm a little autistic or something because I just don't really enjoy people. I enjoy things and systems. Who knows what the truth is? But I just want everyone to understand that most clinicians are just regular people. And I think most clinicians that really enjoy the work that they do probably are between the first and second standard deviation on a couple of the traits that I mentioned in that tweet. I myself am very high on some of these traits and very low on other traits, such that I'm actually not a very good therapist in the sense that I don't really enjoy doing therapy. I believe, pretty good at looking at the dynamics of things and pulling myself out of them and my wishes out of them because I'm aware of my wishes more than other people might be. That doesn't mean I am perfect or that I'm especially amazing at this. I just think I am above average in my awareness and my capacity to notice these things and not let them get in the way of what I do, because I am a little less agreeable than the average person and I'm a little more, not invested in how people see or hear me. So it's interesting. I score very low on agreeableness. I score fairly high on narcissism, which means that I'm very invested in attention, but not in how you actually think about me. So I don't really care if it's good attention or bad attention, which some people might think is sociopathic or something. I don't know if that's true. If it is true, there it is. I don't think that's true because I'm not really interested in causing harm and cruelty to other people. I'm certainly happy to do what is right, even if it does cost people how they feel, right? And so that is maybe a different problem. So this is what I believe is true about myself. If you think I missed any particular traits, let me know, and I can talk about those too in a different podcast. But again, I wanted to do this so that both other clinicians and helpers out there can own who they are. Because if I can do it, and I'm not especially smart or brilliant or special, even though I would like to think that I could be histrionic too. I could be highly sexualized, even though I don't really post very sexually, even though I do like sex a lot. I don't really think that I talk about sex a lot compared to the average person, but maybe I do. I don't know. So for me, I think that if we as a profession could just be more open and honest about who we are, good, bad, and neutral, and the ways that it affects the way we do the work, then therapy would be more effective. And my problem is, or the problem that I think I see is, as a professor in grad psychology, is that a lot of people are not aware of how they are built and the pros and cons of those differences in those traits. If you are at the, second standard deviation on trait voyeurism or sadism or masochism, that is going to have huge consequences for how you do therapy and be a professional that helps people. That's not to say that you can't help people. That's just me saying we should be extremely aware of the ways in which it could hurt people and help people. So that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. Feel free to cancel me. Feel free to sue me. What the fuck ever. I think I told the truth. I think I was mostly reasonable. If anyone here thinks I was not reasonable, or if I'm exaggerating something or underplaying something, I would love to know that. Feel free to say something in the comments. Feel free to call me out on Twitter. My handle, because I love the attention, is at AlobhaPatrick, at ALOBHAPATRICK. And notice how good I am at talking about myself, which kind of confirms that I'm a little narcissistic, So there have been lots of quotes and responses here. So let me see if I can get to some of these in the chat here. Jeff said that's just about everybody on YouTube. Yeah, pretty much everyone on YouTube probably is a little higher on trait narcissism or a little more histrionic or something like that. Jeff, you said what happens when they don't? What do you mean? Oh, not laws too. I don't know who you are, but you said, did your parents put their emotions above yours? I would say that my parents, again, I don't want to speak about them too much because I don't think it's very respectful if they're not here to explain themselves or defend themselves. I would say that from my perspective as the kid in the relationship, they were a little too messy and not really interested in the internal states of my sister and myself sometimes. But also, they were very interested and did their best to be attentive when they could. So I would say that I had, you know, mostly good experiences in childhood, not in the like amazing experiences. I did not have an amazing childhood. I think I was lucky in certain ways. I was lucky that my dad was in recovery. I was lucky that I grew up in Scouts, even though I hated it at the time. I was lucky that both of my parents worked, that both of my parents took me to church. And I'm not a very religious person, as most of you probably can tell from my Twitter, but those were good things for me. And I did grow up hearing them selfishly deal with their own trauma and their relationship issues. They also did their best to be involved in our lives to the extent that we would let them. And I was never neglected. I was not like left to myself. In fact, I was the kind of person that preferred being left alone, a little autistic, let me play with the rocks and play my piano and not deal with people because people aren't that interesting to me. And they just never were, as happens to be the case for more narcissists or autistic types or whatever it is. Jeff said, I didn't take you for Southern. Well, I'm Southern Missouri, which is like quasi-South, not very South. Not Lowe's says, there is no good or bad. There just is what it is and understanding. Yeah, exactly. And I'm trying to talk about these traits from the perspective of not good and bad, situationally, what is useful and not useful. Jeff says, when they don't give you the one-way attention when you don't get that need met. What does that mean, Jeff? I don't know what that means. Did I miss something? Darren says, if you're interested, send me a DM. I'll send you a who do you think you are questionnaire I put together. Yeah, I might do that. I don't really have an ideal self, though. I'm not really, I guess, interested in an ideal. I'm aware enough of the grandiosity and the exhibitionism to not really care about that. I also think I'm integrated enough to not care about ideals because ideals are fictions that serve infantile needs, and I'm trying not to really live an infantile life, if that makes sense. Not that humans don't normally do that. I'm just trying to, be helpful and not let my more immature states run the show, if that makes sense, Darren. Oh, what happens, Jeff said, what happens when they don't give you the attention? Yeah, if I don't get the attention that I want, Jeff, then I am frustrated and I sometimes take things personally, right? So I'm prone to personalizing if people aren't giving me the attention I think I deserve. However, what I've tried to do as a somewhat more healthy, integrated person is be clear about the kinds of attention I want and be clear about where and when I get the attention as opposed to seeking it out everywhere, which is where pathological exhibitionism shows up. Jonathan says, love your homes? Your homes? Which homes? My homes? My house? Or are you saying love me? I don't know. It definitely takes a village. So this has been a very personal and expository podcast about me. Generally, I don't want this podcast to be about me, even though it is about me, because I do like attention and I do like to feel special and important, and I am okay with that. And I do try to get that need met in a more pro-social way that's adaptive for everybody than in a purely narcissistic way where it's just who cares about other people. I try to interact with people, for instance, because I actually think it's useful for people and for me. Everybody wins, right? So I try to live in the everybody wins space as opposed to the I win because I alone matter space. That's, I think, somewhat more integrated narcissism than it is split off narcissism, if that makes sense. So again, I hope this makes some sense. I hope that everybody understands what I'm trying to do and not trying to do. I don't think that I am that unique. And Jeff says, you did a good job. Thank you, Jeff. I want everyone to understand, I'm trying to describe the ways in which I think I am different. There are many things about me that are normal. There are also some things about me that are not normal. And I try to be clear about the things that I believe are not, statistically speaking, normal because of what I think the consequences are for my work as a professional, so that if you're out there and you're considering grad school or becoming a counselor or a pastoral counselor or whatever it is, I really, really want you to take yourself seriously, because I believe the most ethical thing for new clinicians, but even clinicians who have been doing this for a long time, is to be crystal clear about what motivates you, what causes you to respond the way you do to patients. And the more aware you are of yourself, the more you will be able to help people effectively and ethically. And what I'm more concerned about is ethical clinical work, because I believe there are, as I said in another post talking to my buddy Ed online, I believe there's a subset of people that do therapy who are very personality disordered. They're very borderline, they're very histrionic, very narcissistic usually. And those people are specialists. You know, like Marsha Linehan's a good example. She has admitted publicly, so I'm not slandering her or something, that she had a really, really severe case of BPD, and she is organized that way, and it hurt her badly. But it pushed her also to create DBT and create something that's, relatively speaking, very effective for people. And so there are people who are very personality disordered in the field, and I could have easily turned into one of them in a severe way, because I believe I have a lot of traits that could push me in that direction. I also have good luck of accountability and principles that I believe make sense. Back to trait conscientiousness, I believe those principles matter, and if I don't live by them, something bad will happen. And I'm not trying to look bad, back to narcissism. So it's this interaction of these traits that shows up in these different scenarios. And I think if therapists understood the interactions of these traits in different situations with their patients, with their colleagues, with their family and friends, they would have a more nuanced view of what they do as professionals, as opposed to trying to pretend that they are normal, when most clinicians are not, in my opinion, in terms of their personality structure, and pretending that they generally aren't doing anything problematic, when in reality, I bet that a lot of people are unintentionally in the profession getting their personal needs met, as opposed to focusing predominantly on the needs of the patient. I believe that happens a lot. So that is why I walked through my personality organization, the ways in which I think it affects what I do as a professional, how I've modified my life as a professional so it doesn't hurt people or cause unnecessary harm, ethically speaking. And this is what I was trying to do with this podcast today. So I hope it makes sense. If you have questions, feel free to comment or leave a comment when the video is posted. I would really appreciate it, obviously for engagement purposes. But I'd also like to be able to answer questions. So I really, really hope this makes sense. And I look forward to any and all feedback and pushback that's going to come my way from this, because obviously I like a fight and I like attention, but maybe it'll help some people. Who knows? Maybe we'll see. Who knows? So I hope this has helped, or at least made some sense. I have not told a joke in quite some time. So I feel like I should end today's very kind of personal and serious podcast on a joke. So I once had this colleague, worked in the same office, really nice guy, really good guy, like really thoughtful, sweet, kind person, kind of the opposite of me. I'm not very sweet or kind. So really nice guy. And this dude had the office just down the hall from me, but we had this light in between our offices that was burnt out. And I think we're busy or whatever. He's taller than me. He's like 6'5". I'm like 6 foot. He's a huge dude. And this dude was like, you know what? We should probably change the light bulb. We're just kind of in between sessions one day. And he's like, we should probably just change the light bulb. I said, yeah, that sounds like a bright idea to me. All right. I'll see you all next week for another episode of UnShrink Me. Thank you so much for being here this week. Please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you very, very soon. Have a good day, have a good weekend, and take very good care of yourselves. Eat better, sleep better, and exercise more. Bye-bye.